My name is Stephanie McLean. I'm Alberta's Minister for the Status of Women and Minister of Service Alberta. It's wonderful to be here with all of you on Treaty 7 land in wonderful weather here in Calgary for today's announcement. I'd also like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection with this land. Thank you to all the members of the Calgary Police Service who are here with us today. Every day you protect and serve the people of Calgary, and we appreciate your tireless commitment to keeping our great city safe. I'd also like to thank my fellow MLAs and Danielle Aubry of Calgary Communities Against Sexual Abuse for joining us today for this important announcement. I would also like to acknowledge our speakers this morning. Honourable Kathleen Ganley, who needs no introduction, but she is Alberta's Minister of Justice and Solicitor General. Chief Roger Chaffin, who also needs no introduction, and Deb Tomlinson, CEO of the Association of Alberta's Sexual Assault Services, and also joining us is Brian Malkinson, the MLA for Calgary Currie. Earlier this month, Premier Notley proclaimed May as Sexual Violence Awareness Month for the first time in Alberta's history. Along with that proclamation, our government also made a commitment to ending sexual violence in Alberta. In Canada, sexual violence is the only crime that has not declined. It is a crime that impacts women and girls most, and it is a crime where 95% of offenses go unreported, often buried in fear, self-blame, and stigma. This must end. Survivors, we need them to feel empowered. We need them to come forward and report and to know that they'll be treated with dignity and respect. Our commitment brings together 10 government ministries, including Justice and Solicitor General, and community organizations to deliver a coordinated province-wide response to prevent and address sexual violence. It's founded on 3 pillars. First, shifting towards a culture of consent and gender equality and challenging outdated attitudes. Second, funding and protecting frontline services that support survivors and deliver education and other prevention programs. And third, improving the way our law enforcement, courts, schools, hospitals, all of our institutions, how they respond to sexual violence. And that's why we are here today. Law enforcement plays an important role in how we respond to sexual violence and support survivors. I would now like to welcome the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General, Kathleen Ganley, to speak more about this.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you everyone for being here today, and I would like to begin by also offering my thoughts for those injured last night in Mississauga. We're thinking of you and everyone affected by the tragedy. I'm here today to talk about a new initiative that reflects our government's commitment to improve supports for survivors of sexual violence. The Best Practice Guide for Law Enforcement Investigation into Sexual Violence is a tool that will provide police officers across the province with clear, consistent framework for conducting effective, thorough investigations into sexual assault. At the same time, this new guide will help officers understand and respect the effects that trauma can have on a survivor's physical, psychological, and emotional well-being. This will help ensure sexual assault cases are investigated in a way that treats survivors with dignity, empathy, and respect. The guide was created by the Sexual Violence Police Advisory Committee, whose members worked hard on this important project. The committee includes representatives from the government, law enforcement, Alberta Health Services, and the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Services. The committee began meeting in 2015 with the goal of improving support for survivors, developing consistency in law enforcement response, and identifying service gaps in the criminal justice system. While Alberta has had existing provincial standards to ensure that all cases, including sexual assault cases, receive thorough investigation, the committee recognized sexual assault presents a challenge for police officers. These crimes frequently have no witnesses other than the survivor and the accused, and little evidence. Survivors are often have ongoing relationships with their attackers and may be fearful of reporting the incidences of violence. Common myths and incorrect assumptions about survivor behavior or response can cause investigators to misperceive or underestimate the nature and severity of the attack. With these points in mind, the new guide provides best practices for police organizations to follow during all phases of the investigation, from initial response to the complaint, through interviews with survivors and suspects, evidence collection, and the decision whether or not to lay charges. Throughout the process, the guide encourages investigators to take a trauma-informed approach. In other words, it calls upon police to understand how living through a traumatic event can affect how survivors remember events and frame statements and responses. It's a shift in thinking that's more supportive of survivors and results in better evidence collection. The guide supplies police with a clear protocol for referring survivors to support agencies and counseling. The information in the guide, along with the dedicated efforts of police across our province as they work with survivors every day, is designed to help survivors feel safer coming forward. The decision to report sexual violence is deeply personal and can be extremely difficult. We know only a fraction of sexual assaults come to the attention of the criminal justice system every year. We hope this guide will give survivors more confidence to come forward. I'm pleased to be here today alongside Calgary Police Chief Roger Chaffin. Members of the Calgary Police Services had a hand in creating this important resource. The Calgary Police Service is also a leader. They have recently adopted the Philadelphia model of conducting regular reviews of unfounded sexual assault cases with members outside the community, from an outside community. This work is very important, and I will now hand the microphone back. Thank you very much.
We'd now like to ask Chief Roger Chaffin to come and speak about this important issue.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, particularly for the government willing to come to Calgary to announce this event. And I think it's an important day and a moment for us to recognize the seriousness of the issue of sexual violence and how it affects people in this province, and also for me to be able to recognize the importance of the work of the women and men of our service who have been tirelessly providing an innovative approach and an understanding approach to how to focus on victims, how to recognize trauma, and how to connect to our community those community advocates for how we support all those people who have come forward. We've seen a steady rise in the incidence of reported sexual violence, which also tells us we must have a very steady rise in that which is unreported. And I think this is this opportunity for us to say that the Calgary Police Service, the Government of Alberta, and the justice system in general wants to be there to be a sign of support. It is very difficult, as we can imagine, to be somebody who's experienced such harm, such indignity, and such tragedy to want to come forward, but knowing that there are people there that are willing to reach out, they're willing to support, they're willing to help around that path back to dignity is important. And having policing play a role in that, having the willingness and the courage to want to fully engage with community advocates to make sure we're doing everything we can possibly can to find support is important. And this manual will be an opportunity for policing everywhere in this province to advance itself and to become leaders in the idea of what a victim needs and where support will really come from. So thank you all very much for coming today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to some questions.
Thank you very much for speaking from the heart. And I'd like to also thank all members of the CPS for your commitment to improving how law enforcement responds to sexual violence. I would now like to welcome Deb Tomlinson, CEO of the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services, to speak.
Good morning. On behalf of the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services, I would like to start this morning by acknowledging the excellent work of the Government of Alberta's Sexual Violence Police Advisory Committee. I want to say thank you to all of you. So best practice is to have policymakers and professionals who have extensive experience with sexual violence trauma-informed practice be the ones who actually develop the sexual violence policies and training. And I'm really pleased to say, and I'm really proud to say, that that is the exact process that this committee followed. Although the focus of the guide is police investigation, its development was a collaborative effort from a range of stakeholders. And the committee drew not only on the expertise of its local multidisciplinary members, but also national and international research and subject matter experts. As an organization that works with all survivors, those who choose to report to the police and those who choose not to report to the police, ASAS was very pleased to be included as one of the many stakeholders who contributed to the development of this best practice guide. Through our decades of experience standing with and supporting individuals who have experienced sexual violence, we know how difficult it is for survivors to come forward and report to police for so many different reasons. One of the biggest barriers that survivors face are the damaging myths about victim blaming and shaming. Survivors internalize these stereotypes themselves about victim culpability. Also, the people most often targeted to be sexually assaulted are those who are marginalized or discriminated against in our communities. So speaking out about what has happened to them is doubly hard for them. Additionally, individuals most often know the person who offended against them. And this again increases the survivor's fear of being taken seriously. And with most cases of sexual assault, the victim and the accused are often the only witnesses, and there's little other evidence to rely on. And so, only 5% of sexual assaults in Canada are reported to police, and the majority of individuals who commit this crime are not held accountable. And that's why consistent guidelines for best practice in police investigation is imperative. And it's not just in the interest of survivors. It's in the interest of safer and healthy communities. And that's something we all strive for. That's something we can all benefit from. These guidelines will help to ensure that survivors who make the difficult decision to report will receive a fair, sensitive, and compassionate first response. And above all, it is our deepest hope that these guidelines will lead to an excellent and consistent Alberta police response and an increased willingness on behalf of survivors to participate in the criminal justice system.
Thank you so much, Deb, and for all you do and for being partners in this very important work in the work of ending sexual violence in Alberta. Sexual violence affects everyone, and it has an impact on the health and safety of this province. Our commitment to Albertans is to eradicate this violence from our communities, and today's announcement supports survivors in coming forward to the police, knowing that they will be treated fairly and with empathy and respect. So today, to the people of Alberta, we are here to say, you are not alone. If you have been assaulted and you're not sure about coming forward, we stand with you. What happened was not your fault, and sexual violence is not okay. It's time that these crimes are brought into the light and that the age of impunity ends. This month and every day, we will work together, side by side, for an Alberta free of sexual violence. I will now hand the microphone over to Annalise, who will lead the media Q&A for the duration and close the event. Thank you.
We're just asking if you have questions, if you can go to the microphone. I know it's not standard here, but we have some callers on the line who need to hear as well. So if you have questions, looks like Ryan. Go ahead. And just direct it to whoever.
Perfect. First is for Chief Jack.
We can't get Chief to the podium just for the lighting, could we?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. A little far away here. When looking at this guide, can you speak a little bit about how this might coalesce with the Philadelphia model sort of being adopted, and sort of what are the biggest changes from then to now with this guide?
Well, the theme certainly applies across. So on this idea of a Philadelphia model, obviously came in response to this idea about how we're classifying calls, how we understand, do we really know the nature of victimization? Are we handling them properly from the beginning? Do we have the insight to community advocates to allow us to vet our understandings against those who are supporting victims of sexual assault? That same theme applies throughout this manual. It's really a case about thoughtfulness, about being trauma-informed, by being victim-focused, by making sure we have the ability to reach out beyond our own narrow view of sexual violence. Because sometimes if all you can do is approach it as a law enforcement tool, as enforcement of laws, we know we will leave very many people unsatisfied because of the need to have ongoing consistent support, make sure we're connecting them to their path back to dignity and well-being. And that doesn't come simply by the use of the criminal code. It sometimes comes with a more complex approach. So the Philadelphia model was our opportunity to do what one thing Calgary can do very well, is attach to community. But it also spreads through this particular manual about how we can be more thoughtful, how we be more innovative, and be more victim-focused in our approaches now and into the future.
Next question.
And I guess in terms of the amount of time it took to put this together, I'm not sure who wants to take this, but I guess sort of, I imagine this is just a stepping stone. So how do you build on something like this, and how long can we expect to really see sort of the next step here as this group continues its work, as you said there?
So it did take a while, I think, from 2015 to prepare this manual. I think a lot of that had to do with making sure we had all of the right people at the table so that we could do a really good job of making sure we had the right approach going forward. My understanding is the committee will continue to meet on other issues, and of course, you know, our understanding in the area will continue to evolve, and so I think it's difficult to say exactly how the approach will evolve, but I think we need to continue to move with the evidence to make sure we're doing the best job to support survivors.
Do you have a follow-up?
I have a couple of questions about a couple other things, so if you want to stick to this for
Yeah, let's please.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you have any?
Yeah, just as far as on that collaboration, can you speak a little bit to some of the other associations that were involved as part of the larger umbrella association, specifically here in Calgary? Not sure who would best take that.
Oh, who else is involved?
Yeah, just the different support organizations, specifically here in Calgary.
Oh, certainly.
Just so you've got the light on.
Yeah, a wide range of criminal justice stakeholders, from law enforcement, Crown prosecutors, a number of perspectives, as well as the victims' advocates, the sexual assault centers. It was a multidisciplinary group.
Were any victims themselves consulted, and how they would specifically like to see any changes go forward?
There were no victims that actually sat on the committee per se, but at sexual assault centers throughout Alberta, we work day in, day out on the ground with survivors of sexual violence, and we are able to understand what they're going through as they make their way through the criminal justice system, and in that way provide their perspective.
Just one last one. As far as those supports with the support organizations, how might this document help change what they're doing as well, or is it more just informing on the enforcement justice side of things?
Oh, I think this document has the potential to have a positive impact across the entire criminal justice system. The police are the very first people that survivors experience when they enter the criminal justice system. They are the gateway. And so when we work towards a trauma-informed approach, we work towards challenging myths and stereotypes, That's going to make it easier for the survivor as they make their way throughout the entire process.
Thank you.
So when you mention that only 5% report, what is it in this guide that will get out to the community that will get people more empowered to report? What is in this guide that will get people to say, hey, I'll get a fair hearing?
I can speak to that, and probably so can others, but the intention here isn't each survivor is going to make that decision for themselves. And so what we're hoping is just to provide clear direction that when someone comes forward, they will be treated with dignity and respect. Now, ultimately, we hope that that's a consideration for survivors when they're making their decision to come forward. But it's not intended to sort of make anyone do anything. The intention is just to say, if you choose to come forward, we will be here to support you, and you will be treated with the dignity and respect that you deserve.
I'd be happy to supplement that. From my review as well of the guideline, one of the significant pieces, I think, is guidelines on how the first responders here, the police, should interact with the individual who's been assaulted. And so it talks about how practically to really engage in being empathetic, and how to respond in a way that encourages the victim to continue through the process, and acknowledges that a situation where an officer, if they appear to be cold or disinterested, could have an impact of discouraging the victim from continuing with the process, and really emphasizes the importance of having that authentic, empathetic human interaction in encouraging the victim to follow through, because that is a significant barrier. Sometimes there will be reporting, but definitely barriers to following through with that reporting if the victim feels that the process is re-victimizing. So that's what this is largely about, is getting rid of that re-victimization that can occur sometimes in the process, and ensuring that does not occur.
We'll just go to the phone lines. I'm not sure if there's anyone on. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
There are no questions on the phone at this time.
We're good. We'll take a couple more from the floor and then wrap up, guys.
Just a quick left field one for Justin. I guess it's actually two left field ones that might a little bit.
Okay.
First and foremost, I'm just wondering if you've heard any chatter or talk in your constituency here in Calgary regarding safe consumption sites downtown.
So I think we have ongoing conversations about that. Obviously, that is directly within my constituency, and in fact, I think my office is reaching out to a few folks today to have some more conversations. We've been in conversation sort of continuously since as we were developing this, as has AHS, with police services, but also with the community, the Beltline Neighbours Association in the area, with the business improvement area as well. And so I think we will continue to have those ongoing conversations to ensure that this is making the community safer for everyone.
No sort of gauge on the temperature of the residents based on speaking with the organization?
I think generally it's like most things. There is some support and some people that don't support it, so it just sort of depends on what model you're taking. But I think, ultimately, the evidence indicates this can be done in a safe way. The evidence indicates that this is something that improves community safety. So it's just about making sure that we implement it in the best way, and we'll continue to have those ongoing conversations.
I just had two quick questions also. Probably these ones are in the right field, so the left field. First one here, I was down at Okotoks last week, again, for the Eddie Maurice trial, the case down there. And a lot of people are still concerned that even with some of the initiatives we've seen from the province, that it's not happening fast enough. They're still not seeing the protections they need. They're seeing more police on their rural roads, but not what they'd like to see. Where is that all still going at this point?
Actually, we just spoke about this yesterday with the RCMP, but I guess to sum up what was being said is that we're already seeing the impact of those crime reduction units. And I think, again, our our partners at the RCMP, with their expertise, came forward with this plan, and I think that they are absolutely correct. I think that this intelligence-led model, including civilian analysts, including those crime reduction units, is having a huge impact. And I think we had the opportunity to speak to some of the officers who work in some of those rural areas who are not in the crime reduction units just yesterday, and they were saying this is really having an impact on their workload because they weren't always able to do that work of targeting these specific prolific offenders. So I think it is working. I think we need to continue to let the process, take its course. And I think we're seeing improvements already, and I believe that we will continue to see improvements. But we will always be monitoring it to make sure that we're doing what's necessary to move in the right direction.
We'll take one more question and then do a photo.
And then, sorry, just in terms of maybe further legislation, how do you read that the prosecution is already re-examining their case? They're taking another look at it, which is not entirely uncommon, but it suggests that maybe they're not as sure of their case as they were. So how does that change the way you look at maybe how we prevent these kinds of things from happening in the future?
So I'm not sure how I'm not sure what legislation you're referencing in terms of playing into it, but in terms of the Crown, so the Crown will always assess its case up front. So that's, it occurs at the front end and it occurs as an ongoing process. So that's, it's a pretty typical process.